She's one of Britain's top businesswomen, transforming her family business to an empire, selling sex to the nation.
I think I've been set up here.
But how will she handle going back to the floor, where the heat is rising?
The whole factory is fed up.
And satisfying is the name of the game.
You can't do a party with one bra. Why does it do that?
You ain't got the knack of it.
This must make me look really useless.
Jacqueline Gold, the woman behind Ann Summers, is going back to the floor next Wednesday at 10 on BBC Two.
Tomorrow night, join the BBC for Liverpool's toughest test in Europe so far. They enter the cauldron of the Olympic Stadium in Athens against one of Europe's top sides, Olympiacos, fresh from a hat-trick of home wins in the Champions League. After leading the line superbly for England, Heskey will want to bang them in for the Reds. Join Gary and the team for Match of the Day Live, Olympiacos versus Liverpool, with the first half from 10 to 7 on BBC Two and the second half from 8 on BBC One.
The explosion ripped through the area's main street.
Dictated to by bombs.
Shots have scanned in. I'm sending them through now.
It started peacefully enough, but the mood soon changed.
We have had to make a number of arrests.
Of today's demonstration
The ball driven powerfully into the back of the net. The keeper had no chance, and the champions were out.
Local people call it Tumbula Yeya. It means the rain has come.
What has happened is only now sinking in. A bullet has not only killed a man, but destroyed the hopes of thousands.
I should be with you in a minute.
Counting the cost of the torrential rain. New flood warnings for the air. This Walsh for News 24.
And now for the rest of today's top news stories.
BBC News, whenever and wherever you want it.
Jeremy Paxman on BBC Two now with Newsnight.
British soldiers swear allegiance to the Queen, but ought they to be preparing to take their orders from Europe? Good evening. I don't know what they do to the enemy, but they terrify me. The commitment of thousands of British troops to the European Rapid Reaction Force has really rattled the Eurosceptic cage. I'll be asking the Defence Secretary if this is really as far as military integration will go.
So, will you be voting Conservative in the by-election?
At the West Bromwich by-election, our reporter Michael Crick gets thumped by William Hague. This NHS patient has been allowed to buy the drugs her local hospital can't afford for her. Is this the beginning of the end of a truly free National Health Service? And fear and loathing in Miami. Will the American election end with a bang or a whimper? It takes something pretty big to dig out not one but two former Prime Ministers from their lairs to knock the present one over the head. But Tony Blair's decision to commit thousands of British forces to a European Rapid Reaction Force did it today. Both Margaret Thatcher and John Major laid into the idea, believing it had undermined NATO and furthered the ambitions of those who believe in a European superstate. The Prime Minister responded by suggesting Margaret Thatcher was past her sell-by date. Here's our political editor, Martha Carney.
An election battleground is emerging. The government under attack by the Tories over the single currency, with new claims about surrendering British troops to European control.
The Conservatives are delighted. They say they've managed to open up a second front on the idea of Europe as a superstate. Some Labour supporters are mystified. Just why has Tony Blair declared war on the very newspapers he's been trying so hard to cultivate, just 5 months before a possible election?
The Sun joined forces today with an old Euro warrior, eager to re-enter the fray over defence.
That's a good idea. I prefer NATO. I prefer the great alliance between the English-speaking peoples in America. It's that which saved liberty for the world. We lost a lot of people on the continent of Europe defending the liberty of our own country and the liberty of those countries in Europe, and we must never forget that.
Her intervention provoked mockery from an erstwhile admirer at the expense of William Hague.
She's come out and told him what to do, and suddenly the bandwagon's become armour-plated. I gather he now has to sum up his policy in 6 words. Here are 6 words for him. Lady Thatcher, you lead, I'll follow.
But the Conservative leader wasn't deterred from his fundamental attack about British sovereignty.
Don't we have, for the first time ever, the defences of the nation being sacrificed to the political vanity of one party and one man? He is creating a European army in everything but name, building a European superstate in everything but name, and unless he is stopped, he will leave us with a United Kingdom only in name.
Labour believes it can defeat the Conservatives over the Rapid Reaction Force by making their arguments clearly, that each country's soldiers would remain under their government's control and would not become a European army in embryo. But will voters be convinced?
By raising the idea of an integrated army, he also raises issues relating to sovereignty and control. And that's clearly a very sensitive area for the British public. When asked whether or not they feel greater integration will mean loss of sovereignty, a majority agree. And that is the issue he has to beware and has to emphasise the mutual benefits that it will bring rather than the loss of control.
The government knows it'll become even more vulnerable to handbagging in the run-up to the Nice summit. One of the main issues there will be surrendering national sovereignty or streamlining decision-making, according to where you stand in the European debate.
To improve his negotiating stance at EU summits, Tony Blair knows he has to prove his European credentials to the other leaders, despite being outside the single currency. British support for the Rapid Reaction Force is certainly winning him brownie points.
Well, Tony Blair has defended British interests as well as Mrs. Thatcher. Simply, it's a different tone. It's a much more sympathetic tone, like we have a partner in a club. You know, the problem with the British is that they join a club, then they change the rules. Tony Blair at least abides by the rule. He doesn't want his money back, he doesn't want opt-out, he just wants a constructive relationship with Europe, which the Conservatives don't want. They want to go back to the old Thatcher handback attitude.
But when Tony Blair heads for Nice in 2 weeks' time, it'll be harder to sell his negotiating stance to the British public than to his European allies. The kind of change is needed to prepare for more countries joining the EU. We've heard a great deal about Tony Blair wanting to keep the veto on tax, social security and border controls. What you may not know is that he'll also actively be negotiating to end national vetoes on the efficiency of EU institutions and also on single market policy. One man knows only too well the political flack which can stem from Euro summits. Maastricht dogged John Major's leadership. Today he joined in the Conservative attack on Tony Blair.
I think the government are signalling that they are going to give ground by surrendering large sections of the British veto. Not all of those are vital, of course, but a number of them are. They would certainly need to keep all those that are vital. And I hope the signals we have from them that they are going to surrender a veto in a very large number of areas are not right.
Labour could almost write next month's headlines today. After Nice, it's unlikely that the government can draw a line under Europe. The treaty will have to be ratified by Parliament. Ministers are still deciding whether that should be done before the election.
There's a real debate going on about tactics. Many, including Gordon Brown and senior party officials, believe that the euro needs to be closed down as an issue before the election. But the Tories won't let it go. One told me that the euro's like the dome. It won't be bulldozed before the election, which is why many Labour MPs believe it's necessary to campaign openly on the single currency. Some people think that because the single currency is unpopular, you should just let it go and try and close it down, barely mention it at all.
That would be, I think, silly, because we have to face the fact that it's there. It's something that we could be introducing in the next Parliament, and this election is about the next Parliament. So I think when it comes up, we have to address it, and I think we should address it in some of our literature in an informed and balanced fashion, and not an emotive and jingoistic fashion.
Today's argument over Europe is just the start of a long battle between the Conservative appeal to traditional patriotism and Labour's determination to prove its stance on Europe is the best way to protect Britain's national interest.
And the Defence Secretary, Jeff Hoon, is here in the studio. You keep saying this is not the beginning of a European army. Do you agree with Romano Prodi that a European army is inevitable?
No, I don't. It's about improving European military capability. It's about improving the way in which European armed forces can cooperate together.
But he says it is the logical next step in the integration of EU foreign policy.
Well, I simply don't accept that. We will retain control over British forces. A British Prime Minister will decide when they're to be deployed. That matter will be accountable to Parliament.
So you cannot imagine any circumstances under which there is a common European army?
No, I can't, because military deployment, the use of British forces, is something that is quite rightly sensitive to a British government and a British Parliament.
And you really, literally cannot imagine it?
No, I can't, no.
How many European leaders do you imagine think like you?
I would say that all of them do, because they all face exactly the same question about the safety and security of their armed forces.
In that case, why is it that Mr. Prodi can say, when I was talking about the European army, I wasn't joking?
Because he's a European Commissioner, he's not the head of a European government, he's not therefore directly answerable to an electorate that is concerned about the safety of their armed forces.
So, because he's not answerable to anybody, he's just talking nonsense, is he?
He's not talking nonsense, but he's not answerable in the same way as, say, Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, is to the British electorate.
Might make him free to speak the truth that dare not otherwise speak its name.
He's clearly entitled to his view.
But you say he's in a minority of one?
Absolutely.
Seriously?
Yes.
You see, to a dispassionate observer, you could make the case, couldn't you, that all of this European stuff, whether you take the case of the single currency, for example, it starts off with a snake, we go into the ERM, and you end up with the single currency. Passports, we all get a common burgundy-coloured passport, we then get a Schengen agreement, we get open borders. It's only ever going in one direction.
I don't accept that. I think that the British have a particular approach to European integration, which is to look step by step at what is in our best interest, and to agree those things that are in our best interest, but actually not to agree those that are not.
But the point is, we may be doing that, but the rest of Europe probably isn't, or much of the rest of Europe.
I actually find, when I negotiate with my European counterparts, that they negotiate just as vigorously in their own national self-interest as we do.
You don't honestly see a trend in all of these things, whether it be security policy, foreign policy, economic policy. You don't see a common trend towards greater integration.
There are obviously developments that do lead in that direction. No one could argue against that. We've seen the pooling of sovereignty in a number of areas, but equally, perhaps in a greater number of areas, and military integration I believe to be one of them, we've actually seen national governments say this is a matter for national governments and will always be so.
But I mean, we called the Centre for European Reform, very, very pro-European organisation earlier this evening. They were unable to think of a single area in which countries had conceded some sovereignty for it to be handed back.
No, I accept that there are areas where clearly there is a progress towards integration, and we will support that where it is in Britain's best interest, because there are areas where, for example, to allow our industry to trade freely on the continent, we want to see the development of more majority voting, because that actually helps British industry. But equally, there are those areas, taxation's one of them, for example, military integration is another, where we say, look, there is no purpose in arguing this, we will not agree it.
Can you think of a single area in which some sort of autonomy having been ceded to Europe, it's been handed back?
No, I can't.
Doesn't that tell you something?
No, it doesn't. It simply means that there are areas in which we recognise that it is in Britain's best interest to progress towards integration. There are other areas where we simply will not accept that.
When you read someone like Richard Pearl, who it is said may become Defence Secretary if George W. Bush wins the election, saying what really seems to be at work here is a French-led plan to advance its towering conceit, what do you think?
Well, I recognise that the United States is a vigorous democracy. There are a range of opinions, but the reality is that the present administration, from the President on down, is totally in favour of what we're doing. And by the way, my US counterpart, Bill Cohen, is a Republican. He supports wholeheartedly, he said, what we're doing.
So somehow we've got a situation where something completely benign is happening here that is being misrepresented and deliberately misrepresented. Fundamentally untrue, I think was the Prime Minister's phrase. Yes, wasn't it yesterday, about the way that some newspapers are reporting this. How have we all got it so wrong?
Well, I think the word euro or the phrase euro appears in front of this, and I'm afraid that the Eurosceptics in the Conservative Party seize on that and are using it to try and exploit for political advantage. And I regret that. When we're actually talking about a process that in many ways they set in motion. John Major signed up to this at the Maastricht Conference and the Maastricht Treaty.
And he certainly doesn't believe in it now. So, I mean, which papers are we talking about when we're talking, when the Prime Minister's talking about newspapers being fundamentally dishonest?
Well, certainly today there was a good deal of coverage in two particular newspapers that have campaigned on European issues, in the Mail and in the Sun. They're entitled to their view, but I don't think they were accurately stating what was going on.
But you see, it's only a matter of months ago that you actively solicited the endorsement of those newspapers.
I think it's a question of endorsement. What we want to see is our case put fairly, the facts put fairly, and newspapers to get on with reporting facts rather than simply campaigning with comment.
And you really cannot imagine any circumstances under which there's a European army?
No.
Thank you very much. 3 by-elections tomorrow, all of them in safe Labour seats. Commentators are assiduously describing this as the biggest test of public opinion before the election. Well, perhaps it rather depends on how many people bother to vote. A low turnout will be claimed as evidence of dwindling government support. Not that anyone much is seriously suggesting Labour could lose the seats, more that the party's supporters have been reduced to a state of total lethargy. We sent Michael Crick to one of the by-elections, that in West Bromwich West, Betty Boothroyd's old seat, to gee them up.
Grime and smoke are its traditional image, though in truth the Black Country is not quite the hellhole it was. The canals have been redeveloped for tourism, but it's still a very industrial area, a typical old Labour heartland. The strange thing about the West Bromwich West constituency is that it's got absolutely nothing to do with West Bromwich, and it's a long way from the famous football ground. Some people have described the constituency as a kind of dustbin on the edge of Birmingham for those parts that no other constituency really wanted. Places like Tipton and Oldbury and Wednesbury. Tipton is famous for having 13 miles of canals. What do people say about Tipton?
Tipton is the Venice of the Black Country.
Is that what people say?
Well, that's right, but I think Venice is the Tipton of Italy.
Tipton's other great attraction is its new health centre, scene of a carefully choreographed Labour visit. The pensioners waiting beforehand seemed curiously of one mind, not the type to grumble about this year's 75p pension rise. Are you a member of the Labour Party?
Pardon? I am a member.
You remember the Labour Party? And what about you, madam?
Yes, we're very proud of it.
Right, right. And you come along to speak to Gordon Brown?
We have, yes, and tell him how satisfied we are.
Right, right. What about you, sir? Are you a member of the Labour Party? You are a member of the Labour Party, right. Are you a member of the Labour Party?
Over 30 years.
You've been a member of the Labour Party for 30 years? Right. So all the people around this table are members of the Labour Party? Right, so it's... Right, right. So it's not really a sort of typical cross-section of pensioners, is it? The most striking fact about Adrian Bailey is his persistence. He's been trying to become an MP for 30 years now, and a lovely quirk for election anoraks, stood for Labour the last time a speaker retired and caused a by-election, in Wirral 24 years ago, when Gordon Brown was as little known as Adrian Bailey still is. Peter, how are you? Do you expect an easy time here, Mr. Brown? Easy for him, not for us.
Excuse me.
Labour organisers said there wasn't room for a newsnight camera inside, so we filmed through the glass as the party faithful loyally played their part. At least we were honoured by a few words from the great man afterwards. Wasn't that a bit of a fix-in there? Most of those people were Labour Party members.
That was lots of pensioners.
But isn't it possible to arrange an event like that with ordinary people rather than party members?
Well, I've just come from Glasgow this morning, where I've been at the by-election.
They do it differently in Scotland, do they?
No, I've been in the shipyards meeting people. I have been at many by-elections and met people from all walks of life, and today that's exactly been the same process.
Why don't you apologise for the 75p increase?
Thanks very much.
One can hardly accuse Liberal Democrats of stage management, or indeed any management, judging by events when Don Foster brought their candidate and us media to a deserted local station.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not part of this. So...
OK. Have you not sought permission for this photo opportunity then from the railway company?
No, he hasn't. And to be quite honest,
If you would like to leave the platform, we can't have filming on the platform. That is an official statement.
I have just asked.
Expelled into the car park. But it hardly mattered. At 10:30 in the morning, there wasn't a passenger in sight anyway. Politicians and press were left talking to each other. Ah, at last, candidate Sadie Smith suddenly found someone to chat to. Mr. Smith, her husband. But then the Lib Dems know they won't win here. They merely hope to boost their long-term chances. Local Tories have much more realistic hopes, however, with Wednesbury Conservative Club all abuzz as William Hague is having lunch inside. When he finally emerges, there's only one question on people's lips. How many pints was it today, Mr. Hague? How many pints did he have?
The next Prime Minister of Great Britain.
Challenging the Prescott all-time record for short car journeys, it's barely 200 yards for a visit to the Market Square.
When the circus came to town, all the clowns came tumbling down.
Candidate Karen Bissell, a local councillor, never seems to say much, happy to let her superiors handle a bewildered public. You know, who's this chap in the brown coat? Oh, do you know who it is?
Yeah.
Who?
William Hague.
William Hague, that's right, yeah. Do you know who he is?
Yeah,
What do you think of him?
not too bad. Well spoken chap.
Oh, there we are. Yeah. So, how's business then?
Well, not too bad at the moment.
Yeah.
We're slowly up on last year.
So the economy's doing well, is it?
Which is a good thing.
The economy's doing well?
The company's doing all right.
I'm talking to this.
The company's
Don't let these jokers talk. So,
will you be voting Conservative in the by-election?
Oh, yes.
And,
We've got to say that.
there we are. Good. Very well. That's shown, hasn't it?
You're that Rick Van Robinson.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm sound, home, yeah?
Good, very sound as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. How are you?
Excuse me? Do you know who this gentleman is? What do you think of him?
Good, right. Thank you very much.
Not a lot.
Right, here we go.
Did you know who this bloke is in the brown coat?
Yeah, I had no idea.
And who's he? Who's he? Yeah, but what does he do? He's the Prime Minister.
Bye.
If the Tories won in West Brom, it would be a significant step towards Mr. Hague actually becoming Prime Minister, though he knows full well that would depend on huge numbers of Labour voters simply staying at home tomorrow. But Labour's so anxious about that possibility, it's sent in a hard man, Ross Kemp, the actor who played Grant Mitchell in EastEnders.
It's rather important that as many people as possible turn out because there's a really low turnout during the European elections here. So that's why I'm here, trying to raise the profile of the candidate and make sure more people vote.
This is Kelly.
To Kelly. To Kelly, yeah.
What do you think about the Chancellor's budget statement?
This is Michael Crick from Newsnight.
What do you think about the Chancellor's budget statement?
It was a very good statement.
What in particular?
All of it.
Well, is there any particular measures that you thought were good?
Can we decide all to class? We're doing that first, and I'll come and
You're
chat
not
with
going to campaign?
What am I doing now?
Shy.
Don't be shy. It's not going to bite your head off.
He attracted an adoring, mostly female crowd, though not everyone will trade their vote for a signature. Excuse me, madam, will you be voting in the election on Thursday?
That's my business, but I ain't voting for these, that's the same thing.
You're not voting for these? So you're going to get Mr. Kemp's autograph, but you're not going to vote for them?
I like him, yes.
But you don't like... I don't
like the government now. I'm out.
Why not?
Useless.
Did you vote for them before?
Yeah, we thought it was Grant Mitchell coming then.
How are you today? To voters' confusion, Ross Kemp had hit town at the same time and spot as Michael Portillo, though bizarrely Tory officials had told us, and only us, that the Shadow Chancellor wouldn't be there for another hour. We caught him anyway.
He's really sweet. Do you have any brothers and sisters? Does she have any brothers and sisters?
Do you know who Mr. Portillo is? You don't know who he is?
Very nice,
She doesn't seem to know who you are, Mr. Portillo.
Oh, that's all right.
You're not going to enlighten
We still
her.
had a nice conversation.
Yes, we have.
Go on, can you guess who he is?
I haven't yet.
Yes, Portillo.
Ultimately, it all depends on how much people are disaffected and how much they're even interested. Adrian Bailey's problem was shown when he canvassed outside a primary school on a council estate, traditional Labour territory. But it was quite hard to find people who planned to vote. Are you going to vote?
No, never vote.
You've never voted?
No.
So are you not going to bother to vote this time? What about you?
No.
You haven't
I
voted?
have no confidence in any of the leaders whatsoever. Don't vote.
What about you?
No.
You're not going to vote?
I don't know yet.
Isn't it your duty to vote?
Probably.
Are you going to vote in the by-election?
No.
Why not?
Never vote. Don't bother.
Why
Don't
not?
matter who's does he? You know what I mean? Don't really matter.
Do you normally vote?
Yeah.
Which party?
Conservatives normally.
So you're not going to vote Conservative this time?
No.
How about, why not vote Labour or Liberal
I'm not
Democrat?
voting at all. No, don't want to, thank you.
I never vote.
You never vote? Nobody around here ever seems to vote. Strange things happen in by-elections, and if the turnout's really low tomorrow, Labour could face its biggest by-election upset since coming to office.
And here's a full list of candidates in tomorrow's by-election. Now, first there were candidates, then there was an election, then there was counting, then there were lawyers, then there was more counting, and now there are lawyers again. The contenders for the American White House staggered towards the presidency like a couple of quarrelling drunks. Al Gore's hopes raised by the Florida Supreme Court were knocked tonight when officials decided to abandon recounting votes in the state's most populous county because they think they can't meet the Supreme Court's deadline. Our reporter Peter Marshall is in Washington. Peter, where exactly are we now?
Well, we have a combination of crises here, political, constitutional, and now medical. We woke up this morning to hear that George Bush's running mate, Dick Cheney, had been admitted to hospital here in Washington overnight with chest pains. In the last hour, it's been confirmed that he had a heart attack. It's a very slight heart attack, the doctors say, but he has had corrective surgery. Now, Cheney had had a heart condition in the past, he'd had heart attacks in the past, and he'd had heart bypasses. But now we hear he's had another attack, a slight attack. He's not in danger, but that's the position.
And what's the latest electoral situation?
Well, the latest is you'll know by now that the Supreme Court in Florida last night ruled that hand-counted ballots in 3 counties must be included in the final tally, but those ballots must be counted up by Sunday night, which means a race against time for the counters. Now, George Bush isn't happy about any hand-counted ballots being added to the tally because he thinks it'll help Al Gore overtake him. So George Bush is going to appeal to the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court here in Washington, and this is what he said today.
I'm disappointed with last night's ruling by the Florida Supreme Court. We believe the justices have used the bench to change Florida's election laws and usurp the authority of Florida's election officials. We believe the court overreached.
Let us see the votes! Let us see the votes!
Meanwhile, Bush supporters were staging a demonstration for the cameras in Miami-Dade County. They were protesting at the county's decision that since there was no time to count all their votes, they'd simply count those that were in dispute, 10,750 of them, and add that figure to the machine-counted total. The Republicans, who were against any recount, got themselves into a lather.
Bush won twice! Bush won twice!
At this, Miami-Dade's canvassing board, who'd already shifted position 3 times, caved in. They resolved to stop the recount altogether and stick with the figure they reached 2 weeks ago. Bad news for Gore. His people are appealing.
We were disappointed by the decision of the Miami-Dade Board of Canvassers, who had previously found that there was an error in the vote count that did require a manual recount. Under Florida law, once the finding is made, the recount is mandatory. We will immediately be seeking an order directing the Dade County Board of Canvassers to resume the manual recount.
So it's another good day for the lawyers then, Peter?
It is a big day for the lawyers, a big day for the legislators too, though. Florida's Republican House Speaker has been saying a few minutes ago, talking of the constitutional crisis created by Florida's Supreme Court and threatening to get Florida's Congress involved in this. For the lawyers, there was another key legal judgment this afternoon from a judge in Florida. It's on the question of when a voter's relationship with the ballot paper is consummated, the so-called pregnant chads or dimpled ballots. The judge said that these pregnant chads should be counted. This is when a voter makes an impression on the ballot paper without punching it right through. He said these papers should be counted. There are about 2,000 of them outstanding in West Palm Beach, yet to be counted. If they are, it should help Al Gore.
Peter, thanks very much indeed. Now, the concept of a national health service free at the point of use has been something of a sacred political mantra in this country. It has led in recent years to some anomalies, like people being denied drugs because their health authority can't afford them, and denied the chance to buy them out of their own pockets because that would be unfair. But tonight, Newsnight has evidence that the policy is being abandoned. That's what's happening is the creation of two classes in the NHS, those who can pay and those who can't. Our health correspondent Matthew Hill reports.
Our plan is a service which will provide the best medical advice and treatment for everyone, every man, woman and child in this country. Whatever your income, if you want to use this service, and nobody's going to try to make you unless you want to, there'll be no charge for treatment.
From the cradle to grave, healthcare free at the point of delivery to all. The bedrock upon which Bevan's NHS was founded. But gradually this ideal's been eroded. First prescription charges, then dental and eye fees, to many superficial tinkering. But now it appears more fundamental areas involving the very preservation of life itself are surfacing. Valerie Jack, who suffers from multiple sclerosis, was told by a consultant in Bristol 3 years ago her condition could benefit from being given a new drug, beta interferon. Though not a cure, there's evidence it can delay the progression of the disease. The government's medicine watchdog NICE is expected to say whether it should be available on the NHS in the new year after an appeal against an initial decision to ban the drug. But Valerie can't afford to wait any longer.
Basically, I can get up one morning and feel okay. The next morning I can get up and it's very difficult to actually do anything at all.
In the initial stages, Valerie was, she hadn't lost her mobility. And she did have some problems, but not nearly as severely as she's had in the last probably 3 years now. And it's extremely difficult to watch this happening in front of your very eyes.
3 months ago, I filmed Valerie when her condition became so bad she was treated in hospital for weeks. But to make matters worse, she'd been told by her specialist that he couldn't give her the drug despite her willingness to foot the £10,000 a year for it. That's because the hospital, Frenchay, had taken legal advice, as they feared giving a prescription privately could be in breach of the spirit, if not the law, governing the NHS.
Patients should either be entirely within the NHS or they should be entirely within the private sector. It's a dilemma because what we don't want to create is a two-tier system where just because a patient can afford to buy a drug, they get a different service to those who can't afford to pay.
But that is exactly what has happened. In a letter last month to Valerie Jack's MP, Doug Naismith, Dr. Slade appears to have changed his position completely.
The Trust Board has agreed it will ask our consultants to continue to manage, within the NHS, patients who obtain their drugs privately. In doing this, we accept that we may be criticised for supporting an apparent two-tier system, i.e. there'll be patients who can afford expensive drugs and those who cannot.
Though the Trust were happy to talk about this controversial issue a few months ago, no one here at Frenchay Hospital today is prepared to be interviewed. But in a statement, they point out that in the absence of guidance from the regional office or the Department of Health, they've asked consultants to continue to manage these patients. In other words, to give them private prescriptions, but to be responsible for their care, clinical care within the NHS. It says the Trust Board's decided that it cannot stop patients from obtaining these drugs for themselves or refuse their treatment simply because they choose to buy the drugs.
Quite frankly, it would have been against my ethos. But having found myself in the position that I am in, I basically guess it comes back to I would do anything to help myself, and the ethos then becomes irrelevant.
But it seems very wrong. The whole point of the NHS, it should not depend on whether you can afford it or not. It should be whether you clinically need it. And that is a driving thing in the NHS. There should be equality. We have a national health service. Everyone should have the same treatment wherever they live.
Last year, the British Medical Association asked the Department of Health if NHS consultants can issue private prescriptions. The answer seems to be fairly clear.
The advice from our lawyers is a consultant can issue a private prescription following an NHS consultation in circumstances where restrictions are placed on the availability of a treatment.
So what's the government saying about this? The Department of Health has explained their position in a statement to Newsnight this evening.
The law allows patients who are being treated on the NHS to also seek private treatment, provided this is arranged through a private consultation with a consultant.
There are many more new generations of financially crippling drugs just waiting for approval. If the regulator sticks to its initial decision and gives the thumbs down to beta interferon, many more patients will dig deep in their pockets to secure what is a common standard of medication in the rest of Europe.
Well, this is such a sensitive subject that the government and indeed every health authority and just about any other prominent person in the health organisation of healthcare in this country declined to come on tonight. We are joined, though, by a couple of doctors. And first of all, I'd like to come to you, though, Kate O'Shea. You're a sufferer from rheumatoid arthritis, and you've had some experience of this problem of a drug not being available, but perhaps being available privately. Just tell us about it.
Well, I have to say, I've had it for a very long time, since 1969, and up until about 2 or 3 years ago, it has been relatively controlled, and I've had 2 or 3 joint replacements. But within the last 2 or 3 years, the arthritis has gone completely out of control, and they have used something like cyclosporine to try and control it, which I had adverse effects with it. And I think they got to such a desperate stage that they did bring in the consultant to see what the position was. I remember saying to her, well, is there anything, what about the TNF?
This was a drug that you heard about somewhere?
I didn't know a lot about it. I had only been told about it by the nurses just about a year ago. And within that time, when I said about the TNF, the consultant said, well, that wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't really be a question because it's too expensive. And I left it at that because I just assumed that it was too expensive. I didn't pursue it.
No, just to be clear about this, we don't know whether this drug would have been more beneficial than other drugs. The point was that it was simply not available because it was beyond decreed to be beyond the means of the...
Well, that was what was said to me. And at that stage, the names of the drugs were not mentioned to me. The only way I got information was to see Tomorrow's World, who relayed a program last year, which was a very comprehensive program. And they gave all the details, and that's where I followed it up.
What did you think?
Well, when I was told that it wouldn't be available, I assumed that either two things, that I wasn't bad enough or that I really couldn't give another answer. I thought, well, if it is very expensive, then that's hard luck on me, and I didn't know what to make of it.
Now, Dr. Michael Wilkes of the BMA's Ethics Committee, what is a doctor's responsibility in those circumstances? A patient comes in saying, I've heard of this drug. What about it?
The fact that a patient's heard about a drug and thinks that it might be helpful is not quite the same thing as a need to give it. The doctor needs to make an assessment clinically as to whether that's the appropriate thing to give. Now, if
it is appropriate...
If it's appropriate and the patient is not going to get it because of some budgetary constraint, that places the doctor in a very difficult position. First of all, the doctor has to be honest with the patient and say the range of treatment that they think would help that patient, and some of that treatment might not be available. It's not okay to sort of cover up the fact that this treatment is not available. You have to tell the patient, so the patient then has the choice, if they can make a choice, as to whether they may wish to go somewhere else for the treatment because it might be better or more available there, or whether they pay privately for some or part of the treatment.
Do you think that is an acceptable state of affairs?
No, I don't. It's part of the sort of postcode lottery mentality that we've got in the health service at the minute, but it's the reality of the way doctors actually have to work.
Now, Dr. David Spooner, you're a consultant oncologist at University Hospital in Birmingham. If somebody confronted with the choice that Dr. Wilkes mentions to them is able to afford the drug, Should they be able to exercise that choice?
I think that's the nub of the question and nub of the problem. And I think everybody is looking to central government and our masters for very clear directives. At the moment, different health authorities would have different policies as to whether that drug may be available, and some may be able to fund it, and some wouldn't be able to fund it.
But is it right? What's your own view?
I personally feel that in the National Health Service that there should be very clear national guidelines on these new drugs. And I welcome NICE with all its limitations.
That's the National Institute for Clinical Excellence you're talking about.
That's right, that we are receiving, I think, very good quality and fairly speedy advice on these new drugs. I mean, in my own field, in cancer, for example, the availability of taxanes now in both ovarian cancer and advanced breast cancer has been a very welcome additional to our armament. And I would hope that in the next 6 or 7 months, NICE will be reporting on 9 more new drugs that are available to us. The difficulty has been the delay.
Dr. Wilkes, there are always going to be drugs that are beyond the means.
There are always, yes, there are always going to be treatments and availability of treatments that are beyond the means. Whatever system we have, there will be rationing. What we want...
So how do we deal with it?
Well, we want a fair system of rationing, so we can set priorities that will be met for patients in different parts of the country according to equal criteria. At the minute, we don't have that. NICE may be one way of producing league tables of effectiveness of drugs, but it could also be used as a cost effectiveness.
But what is wrong with saying to somebody who may be able to afford a particular drug, which is beyond the means of the particular hospital or health authority, yes, you go ahead and get it out of your own pocket, thereby freeing up the resources possibly for another patient who cannot afford it?
Ethically, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a pity that would happen in some parts of the country and perhaps not in others, and maybe we can accept that in a sort of pragmatic way if the patient can afford it.
But it does mean that those who shout loudest will get furthest.
Those who have the deepest pockets will get furthest as well. So you introduced this package by talking about a two-tier structure, and I think we would be in danger of that if we don't sort out regional differences.
But we've clearly got it now. I mean, that's what the film demonstrates. We've clearly already got a two-tier system.
Yes, and you could say there's a two-tier system because some people have more advantages of treatment in different parts of the country. I think we always have to live with the inequalities. What the structures that the government should be putting in place in their new NHS plan should be geared towards ironing out regional and economic differences. And at the minute, I think that's not actually happening.
Dr. Spooner, when health service patients, if a health service patient came to you and said, I know that the health authority can't afford this drug, but I personally can, what would you say to them?
I think the health authority that I'm employed by has a very clear line on this, and that is that if somebody is prepared to pay for their treatment, then they would have to be private patients, and therefore that they would be registered as private patients.
But then they might not get the treatment at all. They may only be able to afford the drugs.
I think that is the interpretation that I've been used to working under.
Well, it may be bureaucratically convenient, but it may mean a matter of life or death for somebody.
I think the drugs that we are talking about are drugs that are used in a palliative setting at the moment in advanced disease. And whereas I would do all I could to try and obtain that drug for the patient through health authorities, etc., etc. And sometimes one can be successful if one puts pressure on and pleads extenuating circumstances,
Dr. Wilkes, is that an acceptable way to go on?
I don't think it is, because I think we're tending to see a blurring between the NHS and the private sector already with the new NHS.